Before we thought, oh, feminism, let's just flood society. Let's give women the vote, first of all, like against their will, by the way, predominantly their will. They were like, no, we don't want this. We won't. This is a threat to how we live. This is a threat to our values. No, just trump those people, step over them, and give the women the right to vote, and then vote for all these policies, right, that are actually end up hurting families and women, right? On net balance, like they're not good. Like feminism as a net balance is not good for society. And the only counters you guys gave so far is my GDP, and I fought along some really brute IDF soldiers, and they're really good at airport luggage.
Scale, right? We also said innovation scale, and then greater freedoms and rights.
Jimbob and Jake Rattlesnake completely own these two feminist tards on if feminism is good for society. This debate popped up on my feed, and I was like, wait a minute. How have I not seen this debate? Jake Rattlesnake and Jimbob team up? And then I started watching it, and I realized I did see this debate. And for some reason, I haven't covered it yet. But that's what I'm doing here today. But this is the feminism is good because my GDP go up debate. It's pretty irritating and annoying to listen to. Jimbob even starts to get a little angry during the debate, and honestly, I don't blame him. But don't just listen to my summary. Check out the debate for yourself.
Right now, so we're actually in a predicament right now where we have to decide whether or not we're going to use massive amounts of social pressure and propaganda to get women away from your ideal of feminism and back into the home, rearing children and having children and families. Why? Because we're not going to have enough people for the next generation. So what's important right now? You feeling good and going on a Eat, Pray, Love tour and blogging about it, or the next generation of women, women, children? Which is more important?
Part of the issue, so if I could just break this down, part of the issue with your argumentation is you're making a bit of a syllogism, right? So you're saying that society doesn't work without soldiers. Soldiers are men. Therefore, men run society. Am I understanding you correctly?
Well, that was one aspect. The force doctrine is not something you're going to get away from. I'm happy to shift over to the force doctrine. But what I just pointed to is, what's the obligation for feminists to make society good if you have no obligation to reproduce?
I don't really understand your question.
Why are you acting confused? You argue that feminism is good for society, right? I just asked you, what obligation does feminism have to reproduce for women?
Because women obviously want a flourishing society as well.
No, I didn't ask what you want. I said, do you have an obligation to?
I guess I'm not understanding your question.
Do you have an obligation, not so erudite, to reproduce?
No, nobody does.
You don't. Does any feminist that you know have the obligation to reproduce?
I don't think any human being has an obligation to reproduce.
Do men collectively have the obligation to uphold and enforce the law with their bodies?
No, they do not have an obligation.
They don't. They don't have an obligation. So if men don't have an obligation to do anything, and women don't have an obligation to do anything, how the fuck are you going to argue feminism from your worldview is good for anything?
I'm not going to lie. I don't even know if you know what this means. Like, I don't even know.
That's not an argument. No, stop gaslighting me. I just asked you a direct question. Okay. I just asked you a direct question. If men from your worldview have no obligation and women have no obligation, can you tell me how anything from your worldview is good for society with no obligations?
So social contracts establish obligations. The issue is that, like, your gender, for example, isn't the thing that establishes the obligation necessarily. It's the social contract. So if you're in the military, you have an obligation, right? So if you join the military, which you do freely of will, you have an obligation to serve and protect, to listen to your sergeants, to do all the things that you're contracted to do as you join the military contract, right? Those are obligations that you have. When you are born, you have some level of contract that you necessarily establish with your sovereign state. So if you're a citizen of America, you have certain obligations to uphold, for example, by and large, trying to follow the rules of the founding documents. You're supposed to by and large vote. Yeah. Law.
Yeah, but you just contradicted yourself. If by being a part of the society, you have an obligation to follow the law, and you don't have an obligation to actually enforce the law from your view, you just said men don't have an obligation to enforce the law. So you have an obligation to follow the law, but you don't have an obligation to enforce it?
No, nobody has an obligation. Men don't have to be police officers.
So then why do I have an obligation from your view to follow the law?
Because you're in a social contract with your society, right?
So
you don't have
by
to,
being bored?
yeah, by being bored and getting a U.S. passport and birth certificate.
Okay, so from your view, everything's contractual.
Well, you're talking about obligations, right? So you're asking me to establish where obligations are, and social contracts are typically how we establish those obligations.
Okay, so how is feminism good for whatever you're calling good right now, which is a set of what, just like arbitrary contracts between individuals? Is that it? Is that your vision of society?
Well, the thing that I love most about a democratic society, for example, is freedom of choice, right? So I think one thing that feminism does really well is it increases the agency by which women have to live.
Real quick, I just want to comment that this not so Eurydice, I heard she was a Destiny orbiter, and it really shows because she's pretty much the girl Destiny. Like, she sounds just like Destiny if Destiny were a girl. She just needs the jaw swing back and forth, and pretty much girl Destiny right here.
Good. Typically, women will opt to use that agentry to enter into obligatory contracts, such as with their workplace.
You mean contracts that are backed by force?
Force or civil law.
Yeah. Or is that force predominantly men?
Again, just because a society requires, if we had slaves that were all of our police force, we wouldn't say that slaves are running the country.
That's not what I asked you. I said, is the force application in a society that has laws and contracts that can be policed and enforced, is it wholly dependent on mostly men to enforce those? In other words, if you swapped out all the men in the enforcement arm with women, do you think a pure collection of women could enforce flawed contracts and breach contracts between men?
Jimbob, have you ever been to?
I just asked a question. Hold on. No, don't ask me a question right now. You can answer the question.
It was a question. It was a question.
Don't save her. I know you like saving women, but this is on her unless you want to answer it.
What's the question again? Happy to.
You didn't even hear the question. So
no, because you've been rambling like you live in this theoretical world.
Just stop.
All right, gentlemen, that's enough. Jimbob, would you like to ask your question again, and then either Ken or Kyla can give an answer?
Is it possible for a collective of women to be the enforcement arm of a society?
100%. 100%. If you go to Israel right now, when's the last time you've been to Israel?
Israel, a lot of those women have dicks.
Could Bob answer any of my questions?
Uh-oh, is Ken over here, the white knight Ken right here? I'll save you. Is he going the Douglas Murray route of, have you ever even been to Israel, bro? Do you even expect? He's getting closer to that territory.
I've answered all of them.
I want to hear about Israel. I want to hear about Israel.
Tell us about Israel, yeah.
It's just
go through the airport. Go through Ben Gurion Airport. Sorry, Kyla, go ahead.
Tell us your poetry.
No, I want to hear about Israel.
Go ahead, Kyla. Ask your question.
Well, it's just I've asked a number of questions, and I'm just, I guess, at a meta level. I'm not really sure how to engage with you, Jimbob, because the last time you asked me about the enforcement arm, I answered your question, and you told me to stop talking about it because you didn't like my answer. So you can't Mott and Bailey this back and forth. Every time that you don't know how to continue your own interrogation, it doesn't mean that I'm not.
Meta. No one cares about your Yelp review, okay, lady? Look, I asked you a question about something specific, and you moved over to enforcement. I said I'm happy to talk about enforcement, but I wasn't talking about that. I was talking about obligations under feminism. You went blank when I asked you, is there any obligations at all under feminism? Because that's a worldview, right? That's a worldview you're defending. There's no obligations.
So feminism isn't a hierarchical structure. This is the problem. You're conflating. So what you're doing is you're doing the sleight of hand where you're saying things
back to meta. You have no arguments, just meta commentary.
The problem is that it's impossible to engage with you without addressing any of the meta because you're constantly doing a sleight of hand where you shift from talking about hierarchical obligations.
So feminism. So let's take one statement.
Let her finish. Let her finish, please. Let her finish.
Feminism has no hierarchy.
Do I get to finish or do I? So
sure,
no, feminism is not an erection. So for example, if you said matriarchies, we could talk about a matriarchy hierarchy, right? However, the issue is that what you're doing is you're talking about obligations and hierarchical systems, and then you're swapping that really quickly to say, see, feminism isn't establishing. What obligations does it have? It's not a hierarchy. Feminism isn't a philosophical or political structure of hierarchy. It's about the empowerment of women. It's about
what does that mean? What does that mean, empowerment?
Well, if I think you're Christian, right?
Yeah.
So
What does that mean, empowerment?
What does it mean when God empowers you as a Christian?
We're not talking about a Christian view. We're asking about your view.
Answer my question.
No, I just asked you, what does empowerment mean under feminism?
I have to
Christian
answer
view
your
is a
questions,
feminist.
but you can engage
A
in my
Christian,
questions.
dude, you're
Hold
unbelievable
on, hold
the
on,
amount
hold
of
on,
dodging here.
hold on,
Well, you're just
hold on.
interrupting me.
I just asked you,
Can
what
you
does
clarify?
empowerment mean? You're like, what do you think it means? What are you talking about? I just asked you, under your view, under feminism, what is empowerment? You're like, Jimbob, are you Christian? No, that's not what we're talking about. What does empowerment mean?
I just follow me for a second. Don't. It's okay. We're all safe here. Okay.
Safe?
Do you believe? You asked me about empowerment. I need Jimbob. I
We're
need you to
safe
control your
here?
emotions. I need
Hold
you to
on,
stop
hold on.
interrupting and control your emotions for just like 1 second. So you asked me about empowerment, and for looking for common ground, I said, "Well, you're a Christian. So what does it mean when God empowers you?" That's what I'm asking you. Because I think we'll have a similar answer.
I don't share that platitude, okay? That's not my theology. I don't go, God empowers me, okay? That's not even in my paradigm right now. So you're just assuming your own platitudes and bumper stickers apply to me, and it's a way for you to dodge the question. You said you want women empowered. I said, give me an example under feminism of women being empowered. Is offing your offspring empowering under feminism?
So you don't believe that God?
You're not going to answer a single question.
I've answered multiple
total dodge.
Would Jake and Ken like to kind of maybe chime in here?
Let's pretend I'm a Satanist and I don't care about any empowerment for a second. Okay. Let's pretend it doesn't exist.
I thought we had a common ground.
No, we don't. We don't have a common ground. You're not a Christian.
All right. Jake.
Yeah, I'm happy to
and
jump
Ken,
in. I would like to know, Ken, how exactly is, so you think you're trying to tell me that if they took all of the men away and they took all of the men out of the IDF, then all of the women would be able to fight Hamas and Iran just fine?
No, the question was about an enforcement mechanism. And if you look at the police force in Israel right now, if you go through Ben Gurion Airport, it is 90% female, and they do a hell of a job.
Airport.
You do not want to take
because they're patting people.
Just how theoretical your arguments are, your worldview
theoretical.
is. Jake,
just pointed to an airport.
Please let him finish.
You're referring to a philosopher who was born 120 years ago as your basis for explaining feminism. That's just not the world we live in today.
That's when feminism began.
The reality is, when you look at women's role in the military, for example, on the front lines, and my guess is y'all haven't been within 20 clicks of an actual trench or an actual fight. I've actually been in an argument. And
wow.
Oh, he's going full Douglas Murray here with the whole, I have been there. Have you been there? Are you an expert, bro? Side note, can we stop it with the y'alls? If you're not from the South or something, from the country or something, cut it out with the y'alls. It sounds unnatural and it's annoying as hell.
I've put my life in the hands of women who have saved it on more than one occasion. I would do it again. And there are plenty of examples throughout history, in society even today. Go back to, Boudicca taking on the Romans and beating them in Great Britain, up to the women,
an army of men,
and up to the women in Israel today who, I would put the lionesses against Hamas any day. I've seen that up close in Ukraine. The most feared units in some of those areas at the front are female units. And look, I think that you're great at the theory. You're great at bringing up the philosophers who are 120 years old. But in terms of real experience, go live a little. Go talk to an actual woman.
How is this an argument?
This is not an argument, dude. This is just somehow emotional.
What is this, part of your journal?
This idea that women are somehow unable to do both. Look, I've got 3 kids, right? And I'm a feminist, married to a feminist. If your sole objective of like the woman's role in society is procreating, we're managing to do both. So I'm bringing in actual experience on top of your theory to to prove the point.
Whose
that you don't
word
know what you're
wins?
talking about in the real world.
Whose word wins in the house with you? Your
Allow
wife
me
or you?
to make a clarification here. Anecdotal usually doesn't work very well in terms of a debate, Ken. So I have an appreciation for experience and anecdotal, stories and so on and so forth. But as far as like making an argument goes, it doesn't really get anywhere in terms of a debate is formed.
Let's take back to the topic. Feminism is good for society. The question is, does Ken know some tough chicks? Would you agree, Ken, that a good society requires law and order?
Absolutely. I've been
Okay.
part of enforcing.
Oh, no.
law
We
and
don't
order.
need a big story, dude. Stop.
Well, Bob, you
just-
should be able to control your emotions.
No, stop. I'm
Take
totally
yourself
not
to
emotional. This is
when
just
people-
assertive. You think
But that is
assertive is
all.
emotional.
You can control
I'm
your
going
emotions.
to
You can
separate the
create-
two of you if you don't stop.
I'm
Ken,
trying to run a line of argument, and Eurodite's doing
You're
the save
interrupting the
Ken
moderator,
thing,
too.
right? You guys save each other,
Well,
okay?
you're interrupting the
Look, you
moderator,
guys
you're
can't
interrupting
even
the
follow a basic
I get it,
argument right now.
I get it. You're
Is there a female term for white knighting? Like, what's a female white knight called? I don't know. Leave a comment in the comment section below.
You can't even
Wilson
deal.
clone. You took his
okay,
name.
let me.
argument.
I knew the two of you would be definitely at each other's throats. So let me just make some clarifying points here. The interruptions don't help. I know I said this before. If somebody isn't getting there, you got to let them spit it out, and then we can intervene as we need to, but try not to interrupt. We want to be able to make our point. So if you could just, I will tell him to land the plane if I need to. I will get there, but the interruptions don't help.
I want to continue with the Israel and the airport. So Ken, what exactly is your claim here? You're saying that the women are the enforcement arm of the IDF in Israel?
Yeah, my claim is, well, you're conflating the IDF with the airport enforcement, but that's beside the point. My claim is that feminism.
So you're talking about the people who pat people down.
Sorry, say that. I didn't hear you.
So then you're talking about the people who pat you down at the airport and put you through the electrical machines.
Well, and stop the terrorists from blowing up planes.
Do they? Do they stop them all? Of course. They're diving.
So
yeah.
Okay.
What about on the front lines? Because I'm sure
over an El Al plane.
I mean, I'm sure that you're aware, Ken, that they're currently fighting a war. What kind of an involvement do women have in that war?
Pretty significant, especially when it comes to the checkpoints and making sure. I mean, look, I'm not an expert on the IDF. I am an expert on the U.S. military and the role of women in Afghanistan, for example, on the front lines, or in Ukraine right now. I can absolutely speak with a fair amount of authority on that. And look, women have a absolutely vital role to play, and I think the best way to prove
so what is their role though? Like just what exactly is their role?
The best way to prove the point is give you the example of what happens when you don't allow the best in society to fill those roles. You have an army.
It's not my question. It's not my question.
It's not my question. Best would be men anyway.
Again and again. And look, some of the best pilots I flew with were
Anecdote.
Dude, this is anecdotal, Ken. It's a really weak argument. Can we stick to the argument that we're talking about? We're talking about Israel right now, and you're saying that your claim before was essentially that if you look around Israel, that the women are the enforcement arm. Was that your claim, or were you just saying that they pat you down at the airport?
My claim was that their security, what keeps Israeli travelers safe, is women, and that is a very dangerous environment.
Okay, and then who do you think is fighting on the front lines in the current war that they've got at the moment when they're going into Gaza and doing ground invasions in Gaza? Is it men or is it women? It's
men and women. Again, I would rather speak to something
equal.
Probably not equal. No, definitely not.
Well,
equal.
we're being charitable here because Israel probably does have the largest amount of women because the women get conscripted, but it's mostly in support roles. And if you look at the death toll, there's been 891 deaths of the IDF during this war, and 757 of them have been men.
Yeah, men serve in disproportionate numbers, but it is to the strength of Israeli society. It is to the strength of Israeli society that they are able to pick the best people for those really difficult missions. And feminism allows women to have those opportunities and defend Israeli society. Without it, you get weaker societies like Afghanistan, like Iran. And
well, Israel is an example where they actually get conscripted, but they get conscripted into support roles, right? So if you look at other countries where it's not conscription, these women actually don't even volunteer for the army. It's all men who do it. And you're
No,
talking
that's
about
not
US.
true at
Let's talk
all.
about something
is
that
not
you.
true at all.
Let's,
So in Ukraine,
sure.
for
Let's talk
example,
about.
the
Okay. Well,
proportion
let's
of
just talk about something that
women
you're.
Ken keeps bringing up Ukraine. Why is it mostly, or I think even all men that are getting kidnapped off the street by the Ukraine government and being forced to fight on behalf of Ukraine? Why is it men being kidnapped off the street and not women if women are so important to the wars?
Really familiar with
is through the roof. And
They're
What's the death
without
toll?
those women volunteering for frontline roles, Ukraine would
I've
have
seen
been
them-
rolled over.
I've seen them making the TikToks. I've seen it. So what's the death toll in Ukraine, men to women?
I don't know.
You
Well,
don't know?
those
Yeah, it's
ranks-
much
those
less than
ranks-
1%.
Everyone
Much less than
here- I
1%.
don't think anyone here would say, for example, that men don't disproportionately represent military. Like, nobody's arguing with you on that, Jake. I think the more pertinent question that Ken is posing is, if the best person for every position in the military is a man, why are militaries that are all men dog shit, like North Korea or
What?
Hamas?
What are you
How do
talking
you
about?
determine their dog shit? What do you mean? How do you measure
Do you
that?
think that Hamas and North Korea are excellent military systems?
How are you measuring? You made the claim. Don't ask me. You're the one who made the claim.
Okay, I think
I'll give you. I'll give you.
How
a-
did you
an
measure?
empirical
No, wait,
example.
hold on. No, don't save her.
North
Stop it,
Korea
dude.
is,
Stop
notably-
saving her.
It's
Okay,
okay.
Jimbob, do you think that the North Korean army is super strong and capable and powerful and worth fearing, or do you think the American military is better?
I've not gone into gauging that, but you made a statement that you did. So I'm asking you, how did you
Hamas
determine
can
that?
compete with America?
You keep asking me a question based on your claim. Is that your tactic?
Yeah,
You made a
I
claim.
guess it is.
Yeah, it is your tactic to totally avoid. So
I'm
you made,
incredulous, right? I think it's pretty silly
listen,
to keep
listen,
it
As the
It's
military
pretty
vet
obvious. It's pretty
in
obvious
the
that North
room,
Korea and
So you're
Hamas-
not gonna.
Jimbob,
You,
why-
you
why
just
are you
make.
afraid
You
to
just
have
say.
the
You just say shit, and then you, when you're asked, how do you verify that? You say, well, what do you think?
Well, I
Right?
thought
That's
we
your
weren't
whole
talking
thing.
about the meta anymore, Jim.
Nice work. Let's get back to the topic. Why is how is feminist? Name one way. One way in America. Why? How is fem?
I mean, this whole army thing, like the Hamas army and the North Korean army. I mean, are they? I mean, if assuming that they are horrible, if they're horrible, is it because it's all men?
Feminism good for society? That's
I'll-
the topic.
great. I'll give you a way. It allows the best people to be able to, in some cases, they're women, to be able to contribute that talent to society. And I think the military, which is my source of experience, is a phenomenal example of that. America has the best military in the world. I defy you to name another military, save perhaps Ukraine, that can.
Do we have
match
the best Navy
and
SEALs? You think?
it's because we allow the best people
That's great.
to fill those roles, and sometimes they happen to be women.
Well,
Feminism
why,
isn't about making sure that there is 50-50 representation. So that whole
Well,
argument
well, I don't
vis-a-vis
really.
Israel and Ukraine is just a canard. Feminism isn't about 50-50 representation. It's about making sure you afford the opportunity for the best people to fill those roles. And America is a great example of that working incredibly well. Ukraine is a great example of that working incredibly well.
I
And
didn't-
they are
how is it
kicking
good for
Russia's ass.
society? Society, we're talking about.
Well, it defends society when you have a better military. I guarantee you
Is it better
that
military?
feminism in America
Dude,
has allowed us to build a
Wrap it
military
up, brother.
that can,
Dude,
you know,
it's
kick
unbelievable.
Iran's
Well, he
ass
keeps
and take
getting
Afghanistan.
interrupted, so it does make it longer, and then I can't say anything because you've already
Said the same
interrupted him
point 5
20 times.
times.
So
Well,
I
you just tell
hear
them to
you.
stop interrupting, right? Like if
Ple-
men are
yes.
supposed to be the calm ones, it's a little insane that the people who are interrupting the least are the two women on the panel.
More meta. You're really good at meta.
Okay, all right,
You're
settle down.
Very afraid of it, Jim Bob.
Pretty much all you do.
I cannot,
Wanna answer your
Jim Bob, I cannot ask him to land his plane because you have interrupted him 5 times. If you let me seep my way in, I can, but you keep interrupting, so I have to let him continue. Ken, if you could land the plane, that would be great. Thank you.
Societies that embrace feminism, which allows the best people in those societies to achieve those, to fill those roles, are better than societies that don't. And the proof is in how you match up these militaries. The ones that have a feminist basis crush the ones that don't every time.
Wait, what? You're saying that what feminism is good for societies because the military with more women crush the all men militaries? Is that what you're saying?
The militaries that provide fair opportunities for people to fill those roles based on merit and talent are better militaries.
Okay, so you're just pointing to the fairness aspect, not the performance aspect.
Well, fairness leads to the standards are kept, and
They are.
the opportunity is afforded to men and women alike. And if you achieve the standard, you get the best people out of society that way.
Okay, so if I'm in a trench with a choice of 3 men or 3 women, you're saying I could choose either?
I think a cockpit is probably a better analogy, but sure,
Right.
if they meet the standard,
No, it's not a
you
better
want the
analogy
best
because you have to be able to carry people out of war zones. You have to be able to do all sorts of physical labor inside of a war zone. We're not talking about flying a cockpit or flying a drone from Burbank, California.
sure we are.
Right?
That's modern warfare. That's
What? No.
absolutely how wars are fought these days. And maybe if you listen a little more, you'd learn that. But when you
Your
afford
argument
women the
is that
opportunity
because okay,
to apply for those roles, you get the best people, and that makes society stronger.
how does it make society stronger?
Because when
Well,
there's
I think you
people
have to
competing, there's
defend
more
the society in order to strengthen it.
Wait, what? But no, that doesn't tell me how it makes society stronger. What is
Sure.
a strong
A
society?
A good military strengthens society because it protects society.
Well, no, you can have a strong military to protect a really shitty, broken society. That doesn't even follow.
Sure, but you can't have a society that is strong that cannot defend itself.
Right. And that goes to our point. You can't defend yourself without wholly dependent on men. In other words, if you swapped all the men in the IDF, there's 65% men in the IDF and the rest is women and probably some ambiguity in between. So if you wouldn't swap them with women and say, oh, it's no problem, right?
Yeah, well, I think you're misunderstanding the argument that feminism makes. You're assuming it's arguing for a full replacement of men, or even
I didn't say
like
that.
parity,
Dude.
50-50
Stop.
men and women.
I didn't say
What
that.
it argues
I said
is that
stop.
women
Oh my
are
gosh, dude, this filibustering is insane. You
the
just go on this.
interruptions are insane.
No, dude,
Do I get to make my point, or are you going to interrupt every single time?
No, you're
to
talking.
try to make my point.
Okay.
Dude,
All
you're
right.
talking like
all right,
700
all
words
right.
per my 30. That wasn't, you just straw man what I said. okay?
Offer the clarification, Jimbob.
I just basically said this, right? Isn't it the case that you couldn't? I didn't say you would or you should. I'm not saying you're thinking you should. I'm saying could you swap out all of the males from your view, all of the males in the army with women, and it would be equal?
Of course not, but that's not the argument
Why not?
feminism is making.
Well, I didn't say you're making any arguments. You guys actually don't
Already
have any
answered about
arguments.
this. Well,
So
of course
the-
we have arguments. The problem is
there-
that you won't
the
answer
re-
questions. You won't follow our line of dialogue. So, like,
What?
nobody
And you
has
won't
ever
even
looked
listen.
at all
More
women
meta, yeah.
militaries.
The
It's
projection.
not the best
More
situation.
dodging,
It's not
more
what feminism
dodging.
is saying. There's no dodging that's happened. Jimbo,
Yeah.
the only person who's
We're getting-
refused to answer questions.
we're
is
getting to the-
yourself, right?
yeah, right,
You
yeah,
haven't
right.
even, for example, established how feminism.
Lady, I have the
is a
clips of you
hierarchy.
dodging questions. Okay, so
How
look,
is
how's
what
it
is
relevant?
empowerment? You
How
can't
is it
answer
relevant?
that question.
how is it relevant? This is
All
why
of
it's
it is relevant.
relevant, right?
All
It's
of it can be
relevant. I'm telling you how it's relevant. Society requires law and order. A good society requires law and order. You guys agree? Law and order relies on predominantly men, okay? Women can't collectively defend their own rights, correct?
So who are you?
Crickets. They can't answer it. They know the correct answer. They know they lost. This is a losing argument because it's so simple. These feminists don't like to hear it. It may not make them feel comfortable. But bottom line is women depend on men for rights. That's just the way it is. And that's because women can't fight for their own rights without men. If there is a gender war today or tomorrow, and it was all the women versus all the men would win.
Can women collectively defend their own rights? Yes or no?
I've
No,
seen plenty
nobody's
examples of
advocating
that,
for an
sure.
only
What?
women military.
What? Excuse me? You're both talking. One of you at a time.
No one is advocating for a women only.
That didn't answer my question. Let's go to Ken,
And
since you don't want to
absolutely
answer
answered
questions.
your question.
I'm sure there are
Again,
plenty of examples of women.
Let's give me
advocating
one
for that,
example of a collective of women who either took rights from people or defended their own rights.
right? I don't know. The suffragette movement was pretty
Oh, no.
effective at
Great. Yeah, let's get into this.
gaining their own
Yeah.
at gaining their rights.
Really? Oh, really? Did they use force to do that, or did it require men to do that?
They actually
Honestly,
used
not
force
an
to
expert on the
support.
suffragette movement.
No, it required men. And here's the other thing about the suffragettes, Ken. All of the women, the majority of the women, were actually against the suffragette movement. In fact, the suffragette movement actually thwarted the showing up of the women to vote against being able to get the vote. They actually shut them down. So not only are you ignorant to the suffragette movement, that it was primarily anti women voting, was against the movement. And in the end, guess what, Ken? Any policy you think is progress, you and Erudite think is progress, anything you find is progressive and feminist friendly relies wholly on a disparity between the obligations of men and women. What we're pointing to is you haven't presented one good thing for society from a feminist view.
That's because you haven't listened to a word we've said.
You said the military. No, I debunked you.
Point.
Wait, hold on. We've established multiple things, right?
Yeah, give me one,
started this
Erudite.
out. Yeah, I gave you one immediately, which I said
What?
the innovation scale. It increases the innovation scale by 50%, which is good for GDP.
The
Yeah,
innovation
but this is just a
scale?
graph go up. This is just a graph go up argument, Erudite. And if you don't actually have a labor force, if you have a declining birth rate, then you actually can't develop a labor force, and you've got to bring it all in from the third world. So
I'm super curious, Jake. Do you think that America would be nearly as dominant if it didn't allow women into its workforce?
do you think it would be nearly as dominant? Yeah, I think it would. I think it was just as dominant before.
Only men in every other country allowed women in, but we didn't, that we would be the dominant hegemonic global force?
Oh, there would probably be some sort of a social restructuring. It couldn't just happen overnight. I mean, women are so deeply embedded into the labor force right now and into the workforce that it wouldn't be able to happen overnight.
So let's say we can go back in time in the 60s, right? When women are first starting to enter the workforce, 40s to 60s. Do you think that China would have been able to outcompeted us when it allowed women in if we refused to?
What do you mean?
Do you think that the GDP of America would have rose as aggressively and competitively without 50% of a labor infusion if every other country was infusing that labor into its workforce?
Maybe. I'm not too sure.
You really think that if we
how would
just
you know
didn't
that?
allow 50% of our workforce, that we would somehow America would be the global hegemon?
Asking him a question
we don't
and
really know
being
that.
incredulous about the question isn't an argument. You're just basically arguing from
What? You're right,
incredulity.
Jimbob. I don't
No,
even make an
No,
argument.
you're
against
just
that.
arguing.
Jake made
All
this
you
up.
do is
I
this is what
think,
you do.
Jim Bob,
You don't
I
really
think
you don't really think that, right? That's not an argument, okay? Are you
it's
making
just
The thing is, I mean, her argument would work if Jake's and Jim Bob's position was we shouldn't let any women work. But they're not saying we shouldn't allow any women to work at all. That's not what they're saying. See, like my takeaway is that they're not saying women shouldn't work at all. Like we should just not allow women to work. They're saying that they have duties. Men and women both have duties in our society. And with feminism, it has encouraged women to stray away from their duties, which is being a mother, raising children, raising the future generations of people for humankind. Feminism has indoctrinated women into making them think they have to be girl bosses, that their value should come from being girl bosses and from being told that they can do whatever they want, which has actually led to negative outcomes for our society, the current state of our society as it stands. So they're just saying feminism is bad for that reason. So going back to what her point is, well, do you think if they not allowed women, then they would have been able to compete? Yeah, we actually don't know. But I think they would be because men are still majority of the workforce. So who knows if we would have been able to compete against China if we didn't allow women in the workforce. Maybe we would have, maybe we wouldn't have. But that's not the argument, so it doesn't really matter either way.
style. Hold on, Jim Bob. I think it's just a style of speaking, the way she's asking questions. It would be it's the same way you're asking questions. She's just formulating them differently. That's all.
Yeah, I'd like to hear the argument though. What do you think? Do you think that it wouldn't have?
Yeah, I think with not allowing 50% of an increase in global workforce compared to every other country allowing that 50% increase, America would have been decimated. There's no world that we would have competed in any way GDP if we had 50% less of a labor workforce than every other country. That would be really bad.
Yeah, I mean, but like you look at it right now, and the birth rate is plummeting to the ground, and you've got to import the entire third world in order to actually sustain your labor market. You see this in Canada, where you're from, Erudite.
Sure, that's bad though, right? You and I can both agree that declining birth rates is bad. That has nothing to do with the
Yeah,
argument.
exactly.
But women entering
that
the
has a lot
workforce
to do with
was good
feminism,
for
though.
GDP. Yeah, but
Yeah, but this has a lot to do with
direct-
feminism, though.
Sure, so we can go into that separately, but first we have to tackle the GDP question. So do you have any other reason as to why women entering the workforce isn't good for GDP? Or
Well,
do you
look,
agree
well,
with me?
yes.
What happened?
Hold on,
What
Jimbob.
happened?
Hold
The
on,
debt,
Jimbob. Let
the
Jake
debt
answer.
for women went up, right,
Why
dude?
not?
Look, no, this is a debate, okay? So not so erudite. When you shove all the women under the guise of liberation from the home into the workforce, what does it do? It saturates the work market. It actually shows a trend of the amount of pay that everyone gets and goes down because you're just throwing the women out of the home, right? Their obligations is no longer to raise children, have children, make good humans for the next generation. It's to go chase shit. And what happens is you just load all the people in, right? And then what do we have now? We have a saturated market that you call a really great workforce, right? No, it's
I
not.
think the American GDP workforce is incredible.
Who cares what you think? It doesn't matter because if you
Every
saturate,
single respected economist, every single geopolitical leader, every single person in the entire world would agree that the American
and they're all in debt,
GDP
right? It's
is
great, and they're all in
incredible.
debt,
Okay, I
right?
guess
And everyone's
maybe-
I mean, women are out earning degrees than men. Like, women are earning more of the degrees, but there's less women in the workforce. So what does that tell you?
like America. I think America's
So are you in
incredible. I
debt?
think GDP is
Are you in
impressive.
debt?
Yes, it's also in debt, and
Are
it has
you in
nothing
debt?
to do with its GDP.
Are you in debt?
No, I am not in debt.
Okay, so when you look at women who go through college and then they're all in debt, and you're like, this
Sorry,
is
what does this
kick
have to do
ass.
with anything? What does this
It
have
has to do what is the topic of the debate there,
Well, it
Erudite?
feels like you're dodging my GDP argumentation to just move
Yeah,
into
because you're
this
pointing to one
mathematical-
thing that you can look at the number and say that good, and we're not talking
Well,
about
you
the
can't
society
establish
on
why
that.
it's
No.
not good, right?
What can you manipulate the GDP? Can it be other variables? Could you possibly know all the variables that contribute to the GDP?
Yeah, there are
You
other
could?
factors.
You
that-
know all of them? You know all of them?
I don't know all
Okay,
of them
cool.
off of the top of my head. Do you know all of them?
What is it better for the
Jimbob, do
GDP
you
to
know all of the factors
I'm
that
asking you a
contribute to
question.
GDP?
No, you're the one making the claim. So
Well,
you're the
I'm
one
not
making
claiming
these
that I
claims.
know everything
This is-
about the
this is
GDP. I'm
this is
saying that
what
when
happens
women
with
enter
this
the
girl.
workforce and you increase the workforce by 50%.
Uh-oh, you're getting the sigh. You're getting the raging tomato sigh. You know, when Sarah sighs, you know that her patience is wearing thin. But what about your patience, though? What do you guys think about this so far? Leave a comment in the comment section below. Give this video a like if you're liking it so far. What do you think about this GDP argument? I think Jimbob is correct because there are many variables in the GDP.
Increases your GDP. This is obvious, right?
Yeah, who cares if everyone's in debt and they get paid shit? What's the point?
Debt is a tool, right? The issue with like
I didn't ask you what you think debt is. I said
Well,
what
I
good
didn't
is
say
it
what I
for
think debt
society?
is. I said what debt is. Debt is a tool, right? So while I agree that, for example, the fact that we're paying more interest payments than we are for like buying into our military is really bad, debt in and of itself isn't bad, and GDP isn't really in
Has
relation.
debt gone up since? Has
So
debt?
whether-
Yes or no? Yes or no? Has debt gone up for women since they entered the workforce?
Yeah, probably.
Okay, cool. Is that good?
It's neutral. Debt is neutral.
Oh,
It
it's
can be
neutral.
bad,
It's
it can
totally
be-
neutral being in debt and not being able
Debt
to
is
afford
typically
anything.
neutral.
Right.
So, for
Okay,
example,
cool.
maybe I could outline this to you. So one of the reasons why debt can be really beneficial, for example, is in an era of inflation. So when inflation happens, every single dollar is worth less like tomorrow and the next year, which is why if you have $1,000 of debt right now, a year from now, that $1,000 of debt is literally worth less, which is why the richest people on the planet, like Elon Musk and whatnot, constantly work through debt. They consolidate debt, they move it between accounts, but debt is absolutely
usually
the way
good.
that you manage money and income. I didn't say
Usually
debt is
good.
all good. I said debt can be good.
It can be good. Can debt be really bad too, or no?
Yeah, of course.
You said it's neutral, so now you're in a contradiction.
No, I said
You
debt
said
is a
neutral.
tool. It's
You said debt is
It can
neutral.
be- no, I said it's neutral, which means it can be good and it can be bad.
No, that would mean
So-
it's neither good or bad.
Yeah.
So, I guess we can get semantics. I'll update my statement.
Semantics
Sure.
on what the word neutral means. Yeah,
Debt
we
is a
should.
tool, is what I initially said. The debt as a tool can be used for good things, and it can be used for bad things, and it can be used for neutral things.
Okay, so how is it good to advocate for women to, let's say, not stay in the home and have children and instead acquire debt through some shitty social science and go get a job while they're in debt and they can barely afford to even make it to work, let alone their bills and their car payments? Why is that good? As opposed to our stance is, women shouldn't go out into the workforce. We should prioritize a high level funded campaign to get women to have children and to build the next generations of humans. You're arguing, well, there's no obligation, right? Either way, there's no obligation. We're asking you, why is it good why is feminism good in this particular instance, where I'm arguing, Jake and I are arguing, no, don't advocate for women. Actually advocate against it. The ones who break through, fine. If you want to work that bad, great. But at least advocate for women to stay in the home, get married, have children for the next generation. That's going to be more fruitful than them acquiring debt and earning a badge and a cute card for the company they work for. But you're arguing, are you arguing one or the other in this position? I actually don't even know.
Well, it's kind of, well, you probably should know, because I've said it a number of times. I think part of the problem is now you're doing the Mott and Bailey thing again. So now you're saying
more meta
is when
please let her finish uninterrupted.
Other fallacies, we've done it a number of times, right? It's okay. If you define feminism as women have debt and not kids, then that version of whatever you're calling feminism, I would agree, is not good. However, nobody defines feminism that way, right? I offered us a definition of feminism as empowering women, right?
And you couldn't tell me what empowering is.
Let her finish.
Well, you also couldn't tell me what empowering is.
It's not, I'm not making the statement.
Pause, breathe, you can do it. I also answered the question and I said
Unbelievable.
empowerment is giving people choice, which is what Christ does for us. That's when we say that Christ has empowered us. It means that we have free will for salvation. We can choose him or not.
Is Christ a patriarchy?
What?
Is Christianity a patriarchy? You're referencing Christ right now. Okay, so do you want a Christian nation then?
I don't believe that Christianity should be blended with politics, no.
Oh, so you don't think my Christian view should inform my view on, say, abortion? What are you talking about?
No, it should absolutely as a voter.
Oh, so that's a contradiction.
It's not a contradiction.
You
right?
just
There's
contradicted yourself.
It's not a contradiction. I can outline why it's not a contradiction if you'd like.
So premise one, I don't think you should infuse your theology into politics. Also, premise two, you should have your theology inform your view on politics.
Okay, so I know you really like wandering around because you really didn't like the GDP argument. So I will pick us back up because we need to go back to the GDP argument because you claimed that we didn't have any argument for how feminism is good. And I argued that the reason why feminism good is in one standard that it raises GDP by allowing women to enter the workforce, which I think is good for society, right? So we can go back to the whatever.
I didn't ask to go back there. You brought up Christianity. Let's stay right with Christianity. You said you argued for
and running away from the GDP.
I didn't wander. You literally just said Christianity.
When I talked about GDP, you switched it all of a sudden to debt. And then when we were talking more about debt, then you switched it to how I couldn't answer about empowerment. And then I outlined how Christianity talks about empowerment. And now we're talking about Christianity.
Christianity also talks about patriarchy.
Talk about GDP. Do you want to talk about GDP?
No, Christianity also talks about patriarchy, but now you're like, well, let's appeal to Christianity.
The point, right?
You just rambled
Let's pick one or the other. Christianity in terms of empowerment or Christianity in terms of patriarchy, either one. I see that it comes from both sides there, so let's pick one and go.
Well, if you're going to GDP, if we want to go back to the actual topic, which is feminism good for society, then contend with my argument that feminism allows women to choose to enter the workforce, which increases our GDP dramatically by having a 50%.
And I said, who gives a shit if everyone's in debt and can't afford their bills? Useless.
Right. And so then I outlined to you how debt is a tool. Do you have a rebuttal?
I don't care if it's a tool. If people can't afford, right? If you flood the market with people getting all after the same jobs, what happens to the payment of that job?
Well, initially you're going to have a wage drop, and then
has that happened since women have entered the workforce? Yes or no?
I believe initially there was a wage drop, and then what happened is that there were so many more workers that small business owners could suddenly afford to buy workers, and so more innovation occurred. This is why when we talk about the innovation scale that Ken was referencing, having more workers allows for more innovation scale. You have more people to pick from. It drives wages down. It allows people to afford workers more effectively, and now you have more industry, and suddenly you have more jobs, and therefore more GDP. This is how workforce entering the labor pool increases GDP.
Okay, and that's good for a society that is lacking on children?
Well, these are two separate issues, right?
No, they're
GDP
not.
being
They're not
good-
two
No.
separate issues.
You're
They're not two separate issues.
Because if you're arguing feminism is good for X and X is good for flourishing, we're asking you long-term positions, right? Because if you're a feminist, which both of you are, you're making a worldview claim about not only now but the future, right? We're asking you from your worldview, which you're defending tonight, if feminism is good for society, how is it good for future generations if from both of your view you have no obligation to reproduce?
I mean, we can answer this in multiple ways, but GDP is still the answer. Like there's innovator scale, GDP, production labels.
Yeah, but Carla, what do you think is better?
choice.
Do you think it's better if the marketplace and the workforce is entirely flooded with women? If you take it to either of the maxims, if women are just in the workforce 100%, or if women are 100% making babies, what do you think is better for a long-term thriving society?
This is what Jimbob already asked me. It's a mutual exclusive, like improbable reality. Broadly,
It's just
what's
taking
better
it to its
for
logical
long-term-
maxim.
Well, the issue is that feminism is saying that only women should only do work. They should say most like fourth wave feminism, for example, is very pro mom. Well, branches of it, and then there's some antinatalists, but I hate the antinatalists.
But what do you think the answer to the question is, though? If we had to go in one direction or the other, do you think it's better fluffy notepads and emails, or do you think it's better families and children?
I already answered it. I already said, of course, you need families and birth rate to continue. The issue is that you're creating hold on, you're creating a false dichotomy. Right?
So graph go up.
These things, the graph goes up is important when understanding GDP. This doesn't happen.
But it's not long term. It's not sustainable.
Well, women can enter the workforce and have children, right?
But they end up
They can
leaving,
do.
right?
And
Yeah,
if they
of course
hand
they
their
can.
kids off to the state, sure they can do. Yeah. But in terms of the long term, this is a rather new experiment that we've run here in terms of the graph go up that you're talking about. Yes, for the short term, you could argue that it does make the GDP go up. But how's that actually good for society in the long term? That's what we want to know.
Well, a whole bunch of reasons. Strong GDP is really good for a nation for a number of reasons. First of all, it increases jobs, so everyone has more jobs. It increases global wealth of that country. GDP is also incredibly, incredibly important for soft power negotiations at a geopolitical level. So if you don't have a strong GDP as a country, your trade routes are harder. You're going to get tariffed more. You're going to get into trouble more in trades. And so your soft power negotiation skills with foreign groups, particularly hostile ones, is vastly decreased if you don't have the GDP to compete with them. So here's a false dichotomy, but hypothetical. Do you think a society that has 0% women in the workforce is better than a society that allows women to be in or out of the workforce? Would it be
Yes.
better if there's no women in the workforce?
Yes, in the long
It'd be better than what we
term,
have today. Yeah.
Yeah, well, in the long term, yes, better.
So then why is Afghanistan such a shit country?
Because
Because
oh
they're-
wow, cool red herring. So first of all, you
There's
can't
no
you
women in
can't
the
just
workforce.
no stop. So does Afghanistan are they also informed by a worldview?
Yeah, they have a
Okay,
theocracy.
cool. So are we Islam? Are you arguing with Islamicists right now, erudite, or are you just
No,
this
I'm arguing with
dishonest?
somebody-
Are you this dishonest?
This isn't dishonest, Jimbob.
Yes,
so
it
the reason why
is.
this
Yes, it is.
analogous-
Oh, sweetie, don't give me that fucking phone. Look, you just said,
You're okay,
what
Jimbob.
happened to this other country acting like you're basically just argued from this position that look at this other country that has all these other variables and look what turned out for them as if we're holding that position. It's just dishonest.
Can you find me any single country that exists right now or historically where women were absolutely not allowed in the workforce? And the
Nobody's
country is
arguing
better
that
and
they
more
shouldn't be
competitive as a
allowed.
result of it?
Dude, you're so dishonest. We didn't say they shouldn't be allowed. Okay, another slip from your little fork tongue. We said it's better if they don't. Is that the same as they shouldn't be allowed?
Oh, so you
Answer
would
the
say that
question.
it's not.
No, answer the
you would say
question.
it's- No.
Is it
I
the
didn't say-
same? Can you answer any questions? Is it the same?
Answer all of your
Yeah,
questions,
It's
Jimbob.
one yes or no question.
I
is
answered
me
all
say-
of your
is
questions,
me-
Jimbob.
Oh, it's a yes or no question. Let's see if you can do it. When I say it's better to have women out of the workforce and at the home, is that the same statement as they shouldn't be allowed to work?
No, it's as
Okay,
just
great.
false. So
Cool.
hold on.
Stop
Let me
lying.
back you
Stop
up.
being a
Do you want me
liar.
to walk you through again. I can hold your hand.
Wow,
up.
how you're a liar?
Why
Yeah.
did I use
No,
a
it's
false
what you did, erudite, was you asked a hypothetical and then we answered the
Liar.
hypothetical and then you said, well, that's what you guys must think. But actually, it doesn't account for the nuance in our view.
That's not what I did.
Snake.
What I actually did, so Jake, I can outline to what I did. So you guys asked me a false dichotomy where you created two things that were mutually exclusive and wouldn't be allowed to exist together. Where you said women at home or women in the workforce not having children. And I said, well, that's really, these things are not mutually exclusive.
And then you said women at home, and I didn't say, oh, well, you think that all women should be at home. I didn't do that. You did that.
What I did instead is I gave you a question where I made two things that are obviously stupid to pretend that they're mutually exclusive, and then you answered, these things aren't mutually exclusive, which obviously is true, which is what my original answer was to whether they should stay at home or go to work.
All right, well, let me give you
as they like.
Why are priorities?
Okay, let me give you the real story. I'll
mutually
give you the real
exclusive?
story of what just happened, Erudite. We asked a hypothetical, and we said, well, if you take it to its maxim, would it be better if women were just staying at home, or if women were just flooding the workforce and being wage slaves? You said staying at home. We said sure. Then we developed the argument. We could have said, okay, well, Erudite, you think that women should all just stay at home. Why do you think, where are all women just staying at home? We could have done that. But that's exactly what you did with your hypothetical. You asked us an unrealistic hypothetical, and then you claimed that that was our position. That was what you did.
So what I did is I took your argument, which is that women shouldn't be in the workforce, and I took it to its maxim, which would be 0% of women in the workforce. And I asked you to give me an example of a country, for example, that is stronger as a result of having 0% of women in the workforce.
Before we flooded the women in the workforce, that was a pretty good time in America. Before we thought, oh, feminism, let's just flood society. Let's give women the vote, first of all, like against their will, by the way, predominantly their will. They were like, no, we don't want this. We won't. This is a threat to how we live. This is a threat to our values. No, just trump those people, step over them, and give the women the right to vote, and then vote for all these policies, right, that are actually end up hurting families and women, right, on net balance. Like, they're not good. Like, feminism as a net balance is not good for society. And the only counters you guys gave so far is my GDP, and I fought along some really brute IDF soldiers, and they're really good at airport luggage.
Scale, right? We also said innovation scale, and then greater freedoms and rights.
I think that was pretty much a brilliant summary by Jimbob here. Jimbob and Jake, I think, make a pretty good team. It's a good. They have a good cop, bad cop dynamic, which I would actually like to see more of. I would like to see good team ups by these two. The Jimbob and the Aussie, I think their show could be called. You know, they could hold their debates in like interrogation like rooms with the lamp right there, you know, and it's just Jimbob going off on these people, and then Jake being the reasonable one here, grounding the whole thing. I think it would be great. I actually would really much enjoy that. But that is pretty much what this debate is. My GDP go up, and my tough women soldiers that I fought alongside. But even despite those brilliant arguments, they still weren't able to articulate why feminism overall is good for society. Again, feminism isn't just, well, we should just let women given the option to choose. There's been an active campaign, propaganda that tells women, no. Actually, you don't want to be stay-at-home moms. You actually want to be girl bosses. Actually, you guys want to be CEOs. Actually, you guys want to be, you know, this, and that. Oh, you could have kids, but you actually can also work while having kids. So make sure you're also holding down the job while you have these kids. If you're just a stay-at-home mom, you're oppressing yourself and you're allowing your husband to oppress you. That's been the active campaign. It isn't just this passive thing where it's like, well, no, we just believe women could have the choice that they want to or not. No, it's actually, no. It's a feminist supremacy, if you will. They actually want women to outnumber men in the workforce. And just in general, like in all positions of power, that's really what modern feminism wants. It isn't just this passive thing. There's actually a goal in mind, and it has been harmful to society because it's brainwashed women like not so erudite here and, freaking low Kenergy, and all these other wacko feminists into thinking like, no, actually, we need this stuff. Actually, I don't want to have kids, which, as these two have pointed out, you're going to have to end up importing people from third worlds and such with our lowering population. Not beneficial at all. But what do you guys think about this? Sound off in the comment section below. Leave a like on the video if you did like it. And if you really liked it, please consider subscribing to my channel. I would really appreciate that. Also, check out the Raging Tomatoes channel. She's the one that hosted this debate. The full debate's like almost 6 hours long, pretty much 6 hours long. I'll have a link in the description section down below if you want to check out the whole thing. I'll see you guys next time.